Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. This is episode 144. We're going to talk about a whole bunch of things, primarily because I didn't have Wi-Fi for the last few days. My laptop's Wi-Fi connection died, and so I didn't have access to Zoom. And I thought about using um, a direct LAN to use LAN, but I didn't want to do the recording in front of my family, and that's a little bit awkward. So yeah, so I couldn't do it. Had to get a new computer. It's transitioned from laptop now to back to desktop. Wow, it's been a while. But in any case, got everything set up, and I'm back. My arbitration, which was scheduled for Tuesday, this past Tuesday, a couple of days ago, was pushed back another 2 months. This time, the university's lawyer said that he was sick. I'll just believe it, take it at face value for what it is. So my new hearing date is 9/11, which makes me think that it'll be delayed again. But in any case, I'll have to stay anonymous for another 2 months. And that's only because I don't want someone to find this. Not that anyone is even looking for it, but just in case, uh, you know, I don't want anything to jeopardize any kind of potential, settlement, award or financial settlement compensation as a result of the hearing. So if you did say a prayer for me as I requested on Sunday, thank you. Maybe pushing it back another 2 months was the answer to prayer. But first things first, let's talk about the Trump assassination attempt. Honestly, my surprise is that it didn't happen earlier. I mean, you have this so much nasty rhetoric coming out from very prominent people in the Democratic Party, people who have TDS, I guess you could say, Trump derangement syndrome. And, I don't even really like Trump a lot. I mean, I can, respect him as a human being. I can sort of acknowledge some of the things that he was able to accomplish in his life. But as a politician, I mean, there's no principle. And I've mentioned this before. He has no real principle. Everything with him is how do we make a deal? How do we get through this? And so he's always trying to um, make a deal, basically. And unfortunately, the people that he has to deal with are the shadiest people, much, much worse than, the corporate world, a lot worse than that. So I think he's just sort of out of his element. He doesn't understand that, or at least from where he is, he doesn't realize that there is a sort of Ron Paul type approach to government, where you are actually going to shrink the size of government. So I think he doesn't really understand that too much. But I don't think he's deserving of just the sheer amount of hate that he gets from people who don't like him. And I think it's because of what he represents. Um, he's anti-establishment. They don't have dirt on him. They can't blackmail him in the way they can all of these other politicians. And so there are a lot of things to say about the actual assassination attempt. And I'm sure if you've been following the news, you know that, well, not the news, right? If you've been following a lot of personalities on X, then you know that there are a lot of problems with the narrative. There are a lot of different takes from the shooting aspect of it, from the protection aspect of it. People discuss the types of failures that occurred. Then some podcasters and commentators go into the consequences of the failed attempt. What would have happened if it was successful? Now that it failed, what happens next? And then the cover up aspect of it, because, I'm in the camp that says, there were too many catastrophic failures, too many oversights, too many careless mistakes that were made to think that this was not some sort of that there's something more to the story here. But it's hard to suss out everything because there's so much misinformation. People pretending they're one of the counter snipers to all of these accounts of where they thought the shots were coming. Was it from the roof? Was it from the water tower? Uh, so many things. Hard to know what is actually true, what was part of the imagination, maybe echo. Uh, you know, as time goes by, the memory starts playing tricks on you. So there are lots of things, and so um, I'm sure that we will never get to the bottom of it. Just like no one really knows exactly. There's no official sort of recognition of what the official story is for JFK, his assassination, or even for Robert Kennedy. So, and we never will. As long as those people are in power, as long as they can keep all of those records a secret, then we won't know. We can suspect. But in spite of the near tragedy that almost took place, you don't see a lot of cities burning, right? And I'm sure I'm not the only one to say this, but if a hint of something that might possibly, in a weird interpretation, be true, then a lot of people go nuts. They start burning down cities, uh, attacking other people. You have that kind of situation, but you don't have it here. So as much as the people who strongly dislike Trump and all of his supporters, there is a big difference in the way they conduct themselves and also in the way that they respond to tragedies and near tragedies. Now, having said all of that, what I said could probably be construed as some sort of conspiracy and that I support conspiracy theories. Well, of course, right? Because what is a conspiracy is basically a group of people coming together to plan, right? And so what we do with the whole conspiracy theory is we conjecture, right? We posit what might have happened, that maybe a group of people got together and planned this whole thing. And whether conspiracy is good or bad depends on your subjectivity, right? So the founding fathers of this country, they were in a conspiracy, but it was a plan for freedom. And so depending on your subjectivity, is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? And if you take away that component of just trying to piece together what happened, all you're doing is scientific theory, right? Scientific hypothesis. Is this what happened? Well, let's get some more information. Maybe it's that, maybe this explanation or that person's explanation makes the most amount of sense. Let's test it out. And there's the problem. A lot of the critical information that we need is being withheld from us, right? So none of the people who we see in all of these images are allowed to speak so far. Obviously, I think they've been sequestered somewhere. They're being heavily questioned or prepared to give some sort of statement once they reemerge. But there is a lot of issues that need to be, questions that need to be answered on the part of the leadership, the on-site agent in charge, the person in charge, Cheetos, they've been calling her, right? The one who runs the Secret Service, there are a lot of questions. They at least should be answered. And I was even talking to my wife, if there's a multiple shooter theory that has come to light, and I said, well, the easiest thing to resolve that is ballistics, right? You recover the bullets and each gun will have a different marking on the bullet. And so you can kind of tell if there was more than one rifle that was involved. But of course, if that information is not made available, then the conspiracy theories, in whatever sense you want to understand that, will continue and they will grow. right? So the best thing for to resolve and to try to, get over this is to be more open with the information. And if you're like me, then you know that over the last few years, when someone accuses you of a conspiracy theory and that you're a conspiracy theorist, you know, you're like, sure, why not? Because especially since a lot of those thoughts that you had came true. Which brings us to the next topic, which is the idea of canceling. So everyone can say whatever it is that they want to say, but there are always going to be consequences. I've said this. So even yelling fire in a crowded theater, yeah, that has consequences. So if there is no fire and people panic and some people get really injured, even die, then the person who yelled fire is now responsible for that. Now, if you understand that there is liability, there is responsibility, there is a consequence of your actions, then fewer people will do it, right? Like, oh, this will be so funny. Let's do this. No, what if people get hurt? Oh, really? Okay, I guess I won't do it, right? So the more people think about the consequences and the responsibility that comes with the choices and the actions that we perform, it's less likely to happen. Nevertheless, there are a lot of people posted on Twitter that they were angry that the shooter missed. Well, they can say that, but there are consequences. Some people will love it, some people will hate it. And for a lot of other people, it's going to be payback, rightly or wrongly. But it's the manner of payback which now is subject to this question of consequences, right? So you may be upset because of the way that you were treated for saying something, for posting something. And so now you see this as an opportunity to throw it back at those same people. Um, so is it wrong or is it right? I don't know. It really does depend on the person and what you're doing, what the action is. But we can just all simply just say, well, if you go after a person who says they're upset that the shooter missed, whatever it is that you do, yeah, that's your responsibility. And in the same way, then, what action we undertake, how we approach this situation is going to determine whether or not what you did is socially acceptable, legally permissible, or a big problem. And so a lot of people, and so I made a post. I thought that the big difference between the canceling that I'll use the words the left, so-called, were the woke mob, shall we say, was engaging in had the strength of law and legislation behind it, and that's why they could go with such reckless abandon, uh, with such crazed confidence that none of there would be no negative consequences coming back on them. And they were able to really go after people and make it very expensive. Uh, and so punish people in that way. This time, when the right is pushing back against those people who made some really rude posts on X as a voluntary thing, right? So there is no legal obligation to say, oh, I'm sorry, the phone call just kind of messed me up, but uh, there is no legal backing. And so you're really just going to exert some sort of pressure on certain entities to either fire that person or to bring about some kind of repercussion. Now, if obviously the business itself would not have taken that position, but if one of the employees did so, well, now what are you going to do? It's up to the owner, the employer, to decide what to do. So, anyway, everyone will, at the very least, by posting what you post, everyone now knows where you stand, right? What kind of person you are, uh, you know, what's really going on in your head. And you got to wonder what kind of person says those things out loud, right? posts it on some public platform like X. What kind of person does that? Do you want this kind of person working for you? Maybe. Maybe you are, have such difficulty hiring people to fill the job that you're going to be like, okay, well, you're going to still have this job, but I'm going to have to relocate you so no one sees you, right? Because, for your protection, for the protection of the business. So, how people respond also will be a case by case situation. But you got to wonder what kind of person says this kind of thing out loud. I think I've said earlier that when the pendulum was swinging in favor of the woke mob, a lot of the costs of their behavior, of their choices, of their actions were hidden through inflation. And now that inflation is becoming a problem, then whatever protection there was before, it's unraveling. So I'm sure you saw the news that there are more and more DEI programs that are being cut. And so takes us to the final topic of the day, DEI. It's one thing to say in theory that everyone is the same, or some people are more oppressed than the others, right? So depending on how you cut that generalization cake, right, whether that argument makes sense to you, how legitimate is it, how valid is it, is going to vary. And some people, it doesn't matter at all. But for the general public, how you slice that cake is going to determine whether or not you're going to go along for the ride and have some of that cake. But the theory is always different from the real life, right? I've mentioned this before that my guiding principle was to always test out theory in everyday life. So what may be good for a book may not actually be good for an actual person who is struggling with certain issues. So my theories are always tempered by and also critiqued by real life. So it's one thing to say that you want more diversity in the Secret Service. And I think by now you all saw that one sort of chunky, could have been the bulletproof vest, but maybe not. The one chunky female Secret Service agent that looked like she was hiding at one point, although I did see another picture where she was covering the pile with her body. But then she couldn't holster her weapon. So obviously she's flustered. Obviously she's inexperienced. She's never been shot at. And so she kind of is panicking. So some people would say she shouldn't have been on that detail. I agree. But then I don't think she would have been qualified to protect a child either, just because her reaction was just so not what you would hope of a Secret Service agent. The one dude who helped Trump off the stage, he was a U.S. Marshal too. So one might wonder, where is the Secret Service? And I'm sure by now you know that the team that normally guards Trump wasn't there. They took a day off. Whether they were told to take a day off or they asked for a day off, not too sure. But that incident, and it's kind of borderline bullying at this point, but this is DEI on display. So all of the things that have been pent up, you've been wanting to say, but there was very few, at least for the general public, concrete examples where you could point to and say, see, this is what DEI does. Because in most cases, if a woman is doing a job, she can do it. Right? It doesn't mean that she's the best, but she can do it. And so there's no way to measure what if you had someone who was, qualified in the old way, how much that person would have done, and what is the difference between that era and this era. It's very difficult to measure. No one's measuring it by my observation. So DEI was able to hide a lot of the costs, a lot of the consequences of pursuing their policies. And here we see it on full display, public display. And then all of the things that people have always wanted to say, it comes gushing out. Uh, and you see the memes, you see all these people just really going hard on this young woman who probably regrets that she gave the Secret Service a try in terms of employment. So there's that. Say what you will. But for me, it clearly displays a consequence of pursuing DEI policies. Now, that's for the Secret Service, but imagine the implications for the military. Yeah, I know women can be as good as men, but very few. Most of the women that I know would not be able to do the amount of work that men are generally asked to do. And I've heard the stories that if there are women in the unit during training, the guys take turns carrying her pack. And so obviously the military readiness of the unit as a whole is in decline. Uh, so when it comes to combat, having lots of women there, I'm not sure that this is a good idea. And if you listen to Colonel McGregor, then you know that the US is not ready for combat, that because of various reasons, DEI being one of them, the US military is not combat ready. And so this is part of the consequence, right? That a lot of people don't take into consideration who are in favor of certain policies. So it's not that I'm misogynistic, I'm anti women, but I would prefer that people take the jobs that they want, apply for the jobs that they want, and be hired or fired based on their merit, not by their gender, not by their color of their skin, but how good a job can they do. And if you're too short for a detail, then you can't be on that detail, right? If you're too short to be one of Trump's close protection people, then you can't be on that squad, right? I mean, I've talked about it before. I always dreamed of being a fighter pilot, but my vision is so bad, and I have flat feet, and I have other issues which would probably disqualify me. I can't say you have to ignore those conditions so that I can pursue my dream. No, I don't think it works that way. And so to ignore those consequences, to ignore the cost of making choices that probably aren't the optimal choices, well, you're going to pay for it sooner or later. And we got a taste of it over the weekend when we saw some of the emotional condition, the state of some of the agents post shooting, right after the actual shooting. So something to think about. And that's it for this episode. I'll do one more for Friday. And then, of course, my normal Sunday episode is coming up. So I'll talk to you next time.